I dropped the cord. Happily, he resumed, we have still 300 pounds of ballast. What is your purpose? Said I. Have you ever crossed the seas? He asked. I turned pale. It is unfortunate, he went on, that we are being driven towards the Adriatic. That is only a stream, but higher up we may find other currents. And without taking any notice of me, he threw over several bags of sand. Then, in a menacing voice, he said, I let you open the valve because the expansion of the gas threatened to burst the balloon, but do not do it again. Then he went on as follows. You remember the voyage of Blanchard and Jeffreys from Dover to Calais? It was magnificent. On the 7th of January, 1785, there being a northwest wind, their balloon was inflated with gas on the Dover coast. A mistake of equilibrium, just as they were ascending, forced them to throw out their ballast so that they might not go down again, and they only kept 30 pounds. It was too little, for as the wind did not freshen, they only advanced very slowly towards the French coast. Besides, the permeability of the tissue served to reduce the inflation little by little, and in an hour and a half the aeronauts perceived that they were descending. What shall we do? Said Jeffreys. We are only 1/4 of the way over, replied Blanchard, and very low down. On rising, we shall perhaps meet more favorable winds. Let us throw out the rest of the sand. The balloon acquired some ascending force, but it soon began to descend again. Towards the middle of the transit, the aeronauts threw over their books and tools. A quarter of an hour after, Blanchard said to Jeffreys, The barometer. It is going up, we are lost, and yet there is the French coast. A loud noise was heard. Has the balloon burst? Asked Jeffreys. No, the loss of the gas has reduced the inflation of the lower part of the balloon, but we are still descending. We are lost, out with everything useless. Provisions, oars, and rudder were thrown into the sea. The aeronauts were only 100 yards high. We are going up again, said the doctor. No, it is the spurt caused by the diminution of the weight, and not a ship in sight, not a bark on the horizon, to the sea with our clothing. The unfortunates stripped themselves, but the balloon continued to descend. Blanchard, said Jeffreys, you should have made this voyage alone. You consented to take me. I will sacrifice myself. I am going to throw myself into the water, and the balloon, relieved of my weight, will mount again. No, no, it is frightful. The balloon became less and less inflated, and as it doubled up its concavity, pressed the gas against the sides, and hastened its downward course. The balloon became less and less inflated. Adieu, my friend, said the doctor. God preserve you. He was about to throw himself over when Blanchard held him back. There is one more chance, said he. We can cut the cords which hold the car and cling to the net. Perhaps the balloon will rise. Let us hold ourselves ready. But the barometer is going down. The wind is freshening. We are saved. The aeronauts perceived Calais. Their joy was delirious. A few moments more, and they had fallen in the forest of Gines. I do not doubt, added the unknown, that under similar circumstances you would have followed Dr. Jeffreys' example. The clouds rolled in glittering masses beneath us. The balloon threw large shadows on this heap of clouds and was surrounded as by an aureola. The thunder rumbled below the car. All this was terrifying. Let us descend, I cried. Descend when the sun is up there waiting for us, out with more bags. And more than 50 pounds of ballast were cast over. At a height of 3,500 yards, we remained stationary. The unknown talked unceasingly. I was in a state of complete prostration, while he seemed to be in his element. With a good wind, we shall go far, he cried. In the Antilles, there are currents of air which have a speed of 100 leagues an hour. When Napoleon was crowned, Garnerin sent up a balloon with colored lamps at 11 o'clock at night. The wind was blowing north-northwest. The next morning, at daybreak, the inhabitants of Rome greeted its passage over the dome of St. Peter's. We shall go farther and higher. I scarcely heard him, everything whirled around me. An opening appeared in the clouds. "See that city," said the unknown. "It is Spires." I leaned over the car and perceived a small blackish mass. It was Spires. The Rhine, which is so large, seemed an unrolled ribbon. The sky was a deep blue over our heads. The birds had long abandoned us, for in that rarefied air they could not have flown. We were alone in space, and I in presence of this unknown. "It is useless for you to know whither I am leading you," he said, as he threw the compass among the clouds. "Ah, a fall is a grand thing. You know that but few victims of ballooning are to be reckoned, from Pilater des Rosiers to Lieutenant Gale, and that the accidents have always been the result of imprudence." Pilater des Rosiers set out with Ramin of Boulogne on the 13th of June, 1785. To his gas balloon he had affixed a Montgolfier apparatus of hot air, so as to dispense, no doubt, with the necessity of losing gas or throwing out ballast. It was putting a torch under a powder barrel. When they had ascended 400 yards and were taken by opposing winds, they were driven over the open sea. Pilater, in order to descend, essayed to open the valve, but the valve cord became entangled in the balloon and tore it so badly that it became empty in an instant. It fell upon the Montgolfier apparatus, overturned it, and dragged down the unfortunates, who were soon shattered to pieces. It is frightful, is it not? I could only reply, "For pity's sake, let us descend." The clouds gathered around us on every side, and dreadful detonations, which reverberated in the cavity of the balloon, took place beneath us. "You provoke me," cried the unknown, "and you shall no longer know whether we are rising or falling." The barometer went the way of the compass, accompanied by several more bags of sand. We must have been 5,000 yards high. Some icicles had already attached themselves to the sides of the car, and a kind of fine snow seemed to penetrate to my very bones. Meanwhile, a frightful tempest was raging under us, but we were above it. "Do not be afraid," said the unknown. "It is only the imprudent who are lost." Olivari, who perished at Orleans, rose in a paper Montgolfier. His car, suspended below the chafing dish and ballasted with combustible materials, caught fire. Olivari fell and was killed. Massement rose at Lille on a light tray. An oscillation disturbed his equilibrium. Massement fell and was killed. Bittorf at Mannheim saw his balloon catch fire in the air, and he too fell and was killed. Harris rose in a badly constructed balloon, the valve of which was too large and would not shut. Harris fell and was killed. Sadler, deprived of ballast by his long sojourn in the air, was dragged over the town of Boston and dashed against the chimneys. Sadler fell and was killed. Cockling descended with a convex parachute which he pretended to have perfected. Cockling fell and was killed. Well, I love them, these victims of their own imprudence, and I shall die as they did. Higher, still higher. All the phantoms of this necrology passed before my eyes. The rarefaction of the air and the sun's rays added to the expansion of the gas, and the balloon continued to mount. I tried mechanically to open the valve, but the unknown cut the cord several feet above my head. I was lost. "Did you see Madame Blanchard fall?" said he. "I saw her. Yes, I was at Tivoli on the 6th of July, 1819. Madame Blanchard rose in a small-sized balloon to avoid the expense of filling, and she was forced to entirely inflate it. The gas leaked out below and left a regular train of hydrogen in its path. She carried with her a sort of pyrotechnic aureola, suspended below her car by a wire, which she was to set off in the air. This she had done many times before. On this day she also carried up a small parachute ballasted by a firework contrivance that would go off in a shower of silver. She was to start this contrivance after having lighted it with a port fire made on purpose. She set out. The night was gloomy. At the moment of lighting her fireworks, she was so imprudent as to pass the taper under the column of hydrogen which was leaking from the balloon. My eyes were fixed upon her. Suddenly, an unexpected gleam lit up the darkness. I thought she was preparing a surprise. The light flashed out, suddenly disappeared and reappeared, and gave the summit of the balloon the shape of an immense jet of ignited gas. This sinister glow shed itself over the boulevard and the whole Montmartre quarter. Then I saw the unhappy woman rise, try twice to close the appendage of the balloon, so as to put out the fire, then sit down in her car and try to guide her descent, for she did not fall. The combustion of the gas lasted for several minutes. The balloon, becoming gradually less, continued to descend, But it was not a fall. The wind blew from the northwest and drove it towards Paris. There were then some large gardens just by the house number 16, Rue de Provence. Madame Blanchard essayed to fall there without danger, but the balloon and the car struck on the roof of the house with a light shock. "Save me," cried the wretched woman. I got into the street at this moment. The car slid along the roof and encountered an iron cramp. At this concussion, Madame Blanchard was thrown out of her car and precipitated upon the pavement. She was killed. These stories froze me with horror. The unknown was standing with bare head, disheveled hair, haggard eyes. There was no longer any illusion possible. I at last recognized the horrible truth. I was in the presence of a madman. He threw out the rest of the ballast, and we must have now reached a height of at least 9,000 yards. Blood spurted from my nose and mouth. "Who are nobler than the martyrs of science?" cried the lunatic. "They are canonized by posterity." But I no longer heard him. He looked about him and, bending down to my ear, muttered, "And have you forgotten Zambacari's catastrophe? Listen. On the 7th of October, 1804, the clouds seemed to lift a little. On the preceding days, the wind and rain had not ceased, but the announced ascension of Zambacari could not be postponed. His enemies were already bantering him. It was necessary to ascend, to save the science and himself from becoming a public jest. It was at Boulogne. No one helped him to inflate his balloon. He rose at midnight, accompanied by Andreoli and Grossetti. The balloon mounted slowly, for it had been perforated by the rain, and the gas was leaking out. The three intrepid aeronauts could only observe the state of the barometer by aid of a dark lantern. Zambacari had eaten nothing for 24 hours. Grossetti was also fasting. "My friends," said Zambacari, "I am overcome by cold and exhausted. I am dying." He fell inanimate in the gallery. It was the same with Grossetti. Andreoli alone remained conscious. After long efforts, he succeeded in reviving Zambacari. "What news? Whither are we going? How is the wind? What time is it?" "It is 2 o'clock. Where is the compass?" "Upset." "Great God, the lantern has gone out." "It cannot burn in this rarefied air," said Zambacari. The moon had not risen, and the atmosphere was plunged in murky darkness. "I am cold, Andreoli. What shall I do?" They slowly descended through a layer of whitish clouds. "Sh," said Andreoli, "do you hear?" "What?" asked Zambacari. "A strange noise." "You are mistaken." "No." Consider these travelers in the middle of the night listening to that unaccountable noise. Are they going to knock against a tower? Are they about to be precipitated on the roofs? "Do you hear? One would say it was the noise of the sea." "Impossible." "It is the groaning of the waves." "It is true." "Light, light." After 5 fruitless attempts, Andreoli succeeded in obtaining light. It was 3 o'clock. The voice of violent waves was heard. They were almost touching the surface of the sea. "We are lost," cried Zambacari, seizing a large bag of sand. "Help," cried Andreoli. The car touched the water, and the waves came up to their breasts. "Throw out the instruments, clothes, money." The aeronauts completely stripped themselves. The balloon, relieved, rose with frightful rapidity. Zambacari was taken with vomiting. Grossetti bled profusely. The unfortunate men could not speak, so short was their breathing. They were taken with cold, and they were soon crusted over with ice. The moon looked as red as blood. After traversing the high regions for a half-hour, the balloon again fell into the sea. It was 4 in the morning. They were half submerged in the water, and the balloon dragged them along, as if under sail, for several hours. At daybreak they found themselves opposite Pesaro, 4 miles from the coast. They were about to reach it, when a gale blew them back into the open sea. They were lost. The frightened boats fled at their approach. Happily, a more intelligent boatman accosted them, hoisted them on board, and they landed at Ferrara. A frightful journey, was it not? But Zambakari was a brave and energetic man. Scarcely recovered from his sufferings, he resumed his ascensions. During one of them he struck against a tree. His spirit lamp was broken on his clothes. He was enveloped in fire. His balloon began to catch the flames, and he came down half consumed. At last, on the 21st of September, 1812, he made another ascension at Boulogne. The balloon clung to a tree, and his lamp again set it on fire. Zambakari fell and was killed, and in presence of these facts, we would still hesitate. No, the higher we go, the more glorious will be our death. Zambakari fell and was killed. The balloon being now entirely relieved of ballast and of all it contained, we were carried to an enormous height. It vibrated in the atmosphere. The least noise resounded in the vaults of heaven. Our globe, the only object which caught my view in immensity, seemed ready to be annihilated, and above us, the depths of the starry skies were lost in thick darkness. I saw my companion rise up before me. "The hour is come," he said. "We must die. We are rejected of men. They despise us. Let us crush them." "Mercy," I cried. "Let us cut these cords. Let this car be abandoned in space. The attractive force will change its direction, and we shall approach the sun." Despair galvanized me. I threw myself upon the madman. We struggled together, and a terrible conflict took place. But I was thrown down, and while he held me under his knee, the madman was cutting the cords of the car. "One," he cried. "My God." 2, 3. I made a superhuman effort, rose up, and violently repulsed the madman. 4. The car fell, but I instinctively clung to the cords and hoisted myself into the meshes of the netting. The madman disappeared in space. The madman disappeared in space. The balloon was raised to an immeasurable height. A horrible cracking was heard. The gas, too much dilated, had burst the balloon. I shut my eyes. Some instants after, a damp warmth revived me. I was in the midst of clouds on fire. The balloon turned over with dizzy velocity. Taken by the wind, it made 100 leagues an hour in a horizontal course, the lightning flashing around it. Meanwhile, my fall was not a very rapid one. When I opened my eyes, I saw the country. I was 2 miles from the sea, and the tempest was driving me violently towards it, when an abrupt shock forced me to loosen my hold. My hands opened, a cord slipped swiftly between my fingers, and I found myself on the solid earth. It was the cord of the anchor, which, sweeping along the surface of the ground, was caught in a crevice, and my balloon, unballasted for the last time, careered off to lose itself beyond the sea. When I came to myself, I was in bed in a peasant's cottage at Harderwijk, a village of La Gelder, 15 leagues from Amsterdam, on the shores of the Zuider Zee. A miracle had saved my life, but my voyage had been a series of imprudences committed by a lunatic, and I had not been able to prevent them. May this terrible narrative, though instructing those who read it, not discourage the explorers of the air. A Winter Amid the Ice. Chapter 1. The Black Flag. The cure of the ancient church of Dunkirk rose at 5 o'clock on the 12th of May, 18, to perform, according to his custom, low mass for the benefit of a few pious sinners. Attired in his priestly robes, he was about to proceed to the altar when a man entered the sacristy, at once joyous and frightened. He was a sailor of some 60 years, but still vigorous and sturdy, with an open, honest countenance. "Monsieur the Cure," said he, "stop a moment, if you please." "Monsieur the Cure," said he, "stop a moment, if you please." "What do you want so early in the morning, Jean Cornbutt?" asked the Cure. "What do I want? Why, to embrace you in my arms, I' faith." "Well, after the Mass, at which you are going to be present." "The Mass," returned the old sailor, laughing. "Do you think you are going to say your Mass now, and that I will let you do so?" "And why should I not say my Mass?" asked the Cure. "Explain yourself. The third bell has sounded." "Whether it has or not," replied Jean Cornbutt, It will sound many more times today, Monsieur the Curé, for you have promised me that you will bless, with your own hands, the marriage of my son Louis and my niece Marie." "He has arrived, then," said the Curé joyfully. "It is nearly the same thing," replied Cornbutt, rubbing his hands. "Our brig was signaled from the lookout at sunrise, our brig, which you yourself christened by the good name of the Junehardy." "I congratulate you with all my heart, Cornbutt," said the Curé, taking off his chasuble and stole. "I remember our agreement. The vicar will take my place, and I will put myself at your disposal against your dear son's arrival." "And I promise you that he will not make you fast long," replied the sailor. "You have already published the bans, and you will only have to absolve him from the sins he may have committed between sky and water in the Northern Ocean. I had a good idea that the marriage should be celebrated the very day he arrived, and that my son Louis should leave his ship to repair at once to the church." "Go, then, and arrange everything, Cornbutt." "I fly, Monsieur the Curé. Good morning." The sailor hastened with rapid steps to his house, which stood on the quay, whence could be seen the Northern Ocean, of which he seemed so proud. Jean Cornbutt had amassed a comfortable sum at his calling. After having long commanded the vessels of a rich shipowner of Havre, he had settled down in his native town, where he had caused the brig Junehardy to be constructed at his own expense. Several successful voyages had been made in the north, and the ship always found a good sale for its cargoes of wood, iron, and tar. Jean Cornbutt then gave up the command of her to his son Louis, a fine sailor of 30, who, according to all the coasting captains, was the boldest mariner in Dunkirk. Louis Cornbutt had gone away deeply attached to Marie, his father's niece, who found the time of his absence very long and weary. Marie was scarcely 20. She was a pretty Flemish girl with some Dutch blood in her veins. Her mother, when she was dying, had confided her to her brother, Jean Cornbutt. The brave old sailor loved her as a daughter, and saw in her proposed union with Louis a source of real and durable happiness. The arrival of the ship, already signaled off the coast, completed an important business operation, from which Jean Cornbutt expected large profits. The Junehardy, which had left 3 months before, came last from Bodø, on the west coast of Norway, and had made a quick voyage thence. On returning home, Jean Cornbutt found the whole house alive. Marie, with radiant face, had assumed her wedding dress. "I hope the ship will not arrive before we are ready," she said. "Hurry, little one," replied Jean Cornbutt, "for the wind is north, and she sails well, you know, when she goes freely." "Have our friends been told, uncle?" asked Marie. "They have. The notary and the curé. Rest easy, you alone are keeping us waiting." At this moment Clerbout, an old crony, came in. "Well, old Cornbutt," cried he, "here's luck. Your ship has arrived at the very moment that the government has decided to contract for a large quantity of wood for the navy." "What is that to me?" replied Jean Cornbutt. "What care I for the government?" "You see, Monsieur Clerbout," said Marie, "one thing only absorbs us, Louis's return." "I don't dispute that," replied Clerbout, "but in short, this purchase of wood." "And you shall be at the wedding," replied Jean Cornbutt, interrupting the merchant and shaking his hand as if he would crush it. "This purchase of wood. And with all our friends, landsmen and seamen, Clerbout, I have already informed everybody, and I shall invite the whole crew of the ship." "And shall we go and await them on the pier?" asked Marie. "Indeed we will," replied Jean Cornbutt. "We will defile 2 by 2 with the violins at the head." Jean Cornbutt's invited guests soon arrived. Though it was very early, not a single one failed to appear. All congratulated the honest old sailor whom they loved. Meanwhile Marie, kneeling down, changed her prayers to God into thanksgivings. She soon returned, lovely and decked out, to the company, and all the women kissed her on the cheek, while the men vigorously grasped her by the hand. Then Jean Cornbutt gave the signal of departure. It was a curious sight to see this joyous group taking its way, at sunrise, towards the sea. The news of the ship's arrival had spread through the port, and many heads, in nightcaps, appeared at the windows and at the half-open doors. Sincere compliments and pleasant nods came from every side. The party reached the pier in the midst of a concert of praise and blessings. The weather was magnificent, and the sun seemed to take part in the festivity. A fresh north wind made the waves foam, and some fishing smacks, their sails trimmed for leaving port, streaked the sea with their rapid wakes between the breakwaters. The two piers of Dunkirk stretch far out into the sea. The wedding party occupied the whole width of the northern pier and soon reached a small house situated at its extremity, inhabited by the harbor master. The wind freshened, and the Junehardy ran swiftly under her topsails, mizzen, brigantine, gallant, and royal. There was evidently rejoicing on board as well as on land. Jean Cornbutt, spyglass in hand, responded merrily to the questions of his friends. "See my ship," he cried, clean and steady as if she had been rigged at Dunkirk. Not a bit of damage done, not a rope wanting. "Do you see your son, the captain?" asked one. "No, not yet. Why, he's at his business." "Why doesn't he run up his flag?" asked Clerbout. "I scarcely know, old friend. He has a reason for it, no doubt." "Your spyglass, uncle," said Marie, taking it from him. "I want to be the first to see him." "But he is my son, mademoiselle." "He has been your son for 30 years, answered the young girl, laughing, "and he has only been my betrothed for 2. The Junehardy was now entirely visible. Already the crew were preparing to cast anchor. The upper sails had been reefed. The sailors who were among the rigging might be recognized, but neither Marie nor Jean Cornbutt had yet been able to wave their hands at the captain of the ship. "Faith, there's the first mate, André Vasling," cried Clerbout. "And there's Fidel Misson, the carpenter," said another. "And our friend Penellan," said a third, saluting the sailor named. The Junehardy was only 3 cables' lengths from the shore when a black flag ascended to the gaff of the brigantine. There was mourning on board. A shudder of terror seized the party and the heart of the young girl. The ship sadly swayed into port, and an icy silence reigned on its deck. Soon it had passed the end of the pier. Marie, Jean Cornbutt, and all their friends hurried towards the quay at which she was to anchor, and in a moment found themselves on board. "My son," said Jean Cornbutt, who could only articulate these words. The sailors, with uncovered heads, pointed to the mourning flag. Marie uttered a cry of anguish and fell into old Cornbutt's arms. André Vasling had brought back the Junehardy, but Louis Cornbutt, Marie's betrothed, was not on board. Chapter 2. Jean Cornbutt's Project. As soon as the young girl, confided to the care of the sympathizing friends, had left the ship, André Vasling, the mate, apprised Jean Cornbutt of the dreadful event which had deprived him of his son, narrated in the ship's journal as follows. André Vasling, the mate, apprised Jean Cornbutt of the dreadful event. At the height of the maelstrom, on the 26th of April, the ship, putting for the Cape, by reason of bad weather and southwest winds, perceived signals of distress made by a schooner to the leeward. This schooner, deprived of its mizzenmast, was running towards the whirlpool under bare poles. Captain Louis Cornbutt, seeing that this vessel was hastening into imminent danger, resolved to go on board her. Despite the remonstrances of his crew, he had the longboat lowered into the sea and got into it, with the sailor Courtois and the helmsman Pierre Nauquet. The crew watched them until they disappeared in the fog. Night came on. The sea became more and more boisterous. The Junehardy, drawn by the currents in those parts, was in danger of being engulfed by the maelstrom. She was obliged to fly before the wind. For several days she hovered near the place of the disaster, but in vain. The longboat, the schooner, Captain Louis, and the 2 sailors did not reappear. André Vasling then called the crew together, took command of the ship, and set sail for Dunkirk. After reading this dry narrative, Jean Cornbutt wept for a long time, and if he had any consolation, it was the thought that his son had died in attempting to save his fellow men. Then the poor father left the ship, the sight of which made him wretched, and returned to his desolate home. The sad news soon spread throughout Dunkirk. The many friends of the old sailor came to bring him their cordial and sincere sympathy. Then the sailors of the Junehardy gave a more particular account of the event, and André Vasling told Marie, at great length, of the devotion of her betrothed to the last. When he ceased weeping, Jean Cornbutt thought over the matter, and the next day after the ship's arrival, when André came to see him, said, "Are you very sure, André, that my son has perished?" "Alas, yes, Monsieur Jean," replied the mate. "And you made all possible search for him?" "All, Monsieur Cornbutt, but it is unhappily but too certain that he and the two sailors were sucked down in the whirlpool of the maelstrom." "Would you like, André, to keep the second command of the ship?" "That will depend upon the captain, Monsieur Cornbutt." "I shall be the captain," replied the old sailor. "I am going to discharge the cargo with all speed, make up my crew, and sail in search of my son." "Your son is dead," said André obstinately. "It is possible, André," replied Jean Cornbutt sharply, "but it is also possible that he saved himself. I am going to rummage all the ports of Norway whither he might have been driven, and when I am fully convinced that I shall never see him again, I will return here to die." André Vasling, seeing that this decision was irrevocable, did not insist further, but went away. Jean Cornbutt at once apprised his niece of his intention, and he saw a few rays of hope glisten across her tears. It had not seemed to the young girl that her lover's death might be doubtful, but scarcely had this new hope entered her heart than she embraced it without reserve. The old sailor determined that the Junehardy should put to sea without delay. The solidly built ship had no need of repairs. Jean Cornbutt gave his sailors notice that if they wished to re-embark, no change in the crew would be made. He alone replaced his son in the command of the brig. None of the comrades of Louis Cornbutt failed to respond to his call, and there were hardy tars among them: Elaine Turquiette, Fidel Misson the carpenter, Penelon the Breton, who replaced Pierre Nauquet as helmsman, and Gradlin, Opic, and Jervik, courageous and well-tried mariners. Jean Cornbutt again offered André Vasling his old rank on board. The first mate was an able officer who had proved his skill in bringing the Junehardy into port. Yet, from what motive could not be told, André made some difficulties and asked time for reflection. "As you will, André Vasling," replied Cornbutt. "Only remember that if you accept, you will be welcome among us." Jean had a devoted sailor in Penelon the Breton who had long been his fellow voyager. In times gone by, little Marie was wont to pass the long winter evenings in the helmsman's arms when he was on shore. He felt a fatherly friendship for her, and she had for him our affection quite filial. Penelon hastened the fitting out of the ship with all his energy, all the more because, according to his opinion, André Vasling had not perhaps made every effort possible to find the castaways, although he was excusable from the responsibility which weighed upon him as captain. Within a week, the Junehardy was ready to put to sea. Instead of merchandise, she was completely provided with salt meats, biscuits, barrels of flour, potatoes, pork, wine, brandy, coffee, tea, and tobacco. The departure was fixed for the 22nd of May. On the evening before, André Vasling, who had not yet given his answer to Jean Cornbutt, came to his house. He was still undecided and did not know which course to take. Jean was not at home, though the house door was open. André went into the passage next to Marie's chamber, where the sound of an animated conversation struck his ear. He listened attentively and recognized the voices of Penelon and Marie. The discussion had no doubt been going on for some time, for the young girl seemed to be stoutly opposing what the Breton sailor said. "How old is my Uncle Cornbutt?" said Marie. "Something about 60 years, replied Penelon. "Well, is he not going to brave danger to find his son?" "Our captain is still a sturdy man," returned the sailor. "He has a body of oak and muscles as hard as a spare spar, so I am not afraid to have him go to sea again." "My good Penelon," said Marie, "one is strong when one loves. Besides, I have full confidence in the aid of heaven. You understand me and will help me." "No," said Penelon, It is impossible, Marie. Who knows whither we shall drift, or what we must suffer? How many vigorous men have I seen lose their lives in these seas?" "Penelon," returned the young girl, "if you refuse me, I shall believe that you do not love me any longer." André Vasling understood the young girl's resolution. He reflected a moment, and his course was determined on. "Jean Cornbutt," said he, advancing towards the old sailor who now entered, "I will go with you. The cause of my hesitation has disappeared, and you may count upon my devotion." "I have never doubted you, André Vasling," replied Jean Cornbutt, grasping him by the hand. "Marie, my child," he added, calling in a loud voice. Marie and Penelon made their appearance. "We shall set sail tomorrow at daybreak, with the outgoing tide," said Jean. "My poor Marie, this is the last evening that we shall pass together." "Uncle," cried Marie, throwing herself into his arms. "Marie, by the help of God, I will bring your lover back to you." "Yes, we will find Louis," added André Vasling. "You are going with us then?" asked Penelon quickly. "Yes, Penelon, André Vasling is to be my first mate," answered Jean. "Oh," ejaculated the Breton in a singular tone. "And his advice will be useful to us, for he is able and enterprising." "And yourself, Captain," said André, "you will set us all a good example, for you have still as much vigor as experience." "Well, my friends, goodbye till tomorrow. Go on board and make the final arrangements. Goodbye, André, goodbye, Penelon." The mate and the sailor went out together, and Jean and Marie remained alone. Many bitter tears were shed during that sad evening. Jean Cornbutt, seeing Marie so wretched, resolved to spare her the pain of separation by leaving the house on the morrow without her knowledge. So he gave her a last kiss that evening, and at 3 o'clock next morning was up and away. The departure of the brig had attracted all the old sailor's friends to the pier. The curé, who was to have blessed Marie's union with Louis, came to give a last benediction on the ship. Rough grasps of the hand were silently exchanged, and Jean went on board. The crew were all there. André Vasling gave the last orders. The sails were spread, and the brig rapidly passed out under a stiff northwest breeze, whilst the curé, upright in the midst of the kneeling spectators, committed the vessel to the hands of God. "Whither goes this ship? She follows the perilous route upon which so many castaways have been lost. She has no certain destination. She must expect every peril and be able to brave them without hesitating. God alone knows where it will be her fate to anchor. May God guide her." Chapter 3. A Ray of Hope. At that time of the year, the season was favorable, and the crew might hope promptly to reach the scene of the shipwreck. Jean Cornbutt's plan was naturally traced out. He counted on stopping at the Faroe Islands, whither the north wind might have carried the castaways. Then, if he was convinced that they had not been received in any of the ports of that locality, he would continue his search beyond the Northern Ocean, ransack the whole western coast of Norway as far as Bodø, the place nearest the scene of the shipwreck, and, if necessary, farther still. André Vasling thought, contrary to the captain's opinion, that the coast of Iceland should be explored, but Penelon observed that, at the time of the catastrophe, the gale came from the west, which, while it gave hope that the unfortunates had not been forced towards the Gulf of the Maelstrom, gave ground for supposing that they might have been thrown on the Norwegian coast. It was determined, then, that this coast should be followed as closely as possible, so as to recognize any traces of them that might appear. The day after sailing, Jean Cornbutt, intent upon a map, was absorbed in reflection, when a small hand touched his shoulder, and a soft voice said in his ear, "Have good courage, uncle." A soft voice said in his ear, "Have good courage, uncle." He turned and was stupefied. Marie embraced him. "Marie, my daughter, on board," he cried. "The wife may well go in search of her husband when the father embarks to save his child. Unhappy Marie, how wilt thou support our fatigues? Dost thou know that thy presence may be injurious to our search?" "No, uncle, for I am strong." Who knows whither we shall be forced to go, Marie? Look at this map. We are approaching places dangerous even for us sailors, hardened though we are to the difficulties of the sea. And thou, frail child. But uncle, I come from a family of sailors. I am used to stories of combats and tempests. I am with you and my old friend Penellan. Penellan, it was he who concealed you on board. Yes, uncle, but only when he saw that I was determined to come without his help. Penellan, cried Jean. Penellan entered. It is not possible to undo what you have done, Penellan, but remember that you are responsible for Marie's life. Rest easy, Captain, replied Penellan. The little one has force and courage and will be our guardian angel. And then, Captain, you know it is my theory that all in this world happens for the best. The young girl was installed in a cabin, which the sailors soon got ready for her, and which they made as comfortable as possible. A week later, the June Hardy stopped at the Faroe Islands, but the most minute search was fruitless. No wreck or fragments of a ship had come upon these coasts. Even the news of the event was quite unknown. The brig resumed its voyage after a stay of 10 days about the 10th of June. The sea was calm and the winds were favorable. The ship sped rapidly towards the Norwegian coast, which it explored without better result. Jean Cornbutt determined to proceed to Bodo. Perhaps he would there learn the name of the shipwrecked schooner to succor which Louis and the sailors had sacrificed themselves. On the 30th of June, the brig cast anchor in that port. The authorities of Bodo gave Jean Cornbutt a bottle found on the coast, which contained a document bearing these words. This 26th April, on board the Fruin, after being accosted by the longboat of the June Hardy, we were drawn by the currents towards the ice. God have pity on us. Jean Cornbutt's first impulse was to thank heaven. He thought himself on his son's track. The Fruin was a Norwegian sloop of which there had been no news, but which had evidently been drawn northward. Not a day was to be lost. The June Hardy was at once put in condition to brave the perils of the polar seas. Fidel Misson, the carpenter, carefully examined her and assured himself that her solid construction might resist the shock of the ice masses. Penellan, who had already engaged in whale fishing in the Arctic waters, took care that woolen and fur coverings, many sealskin moccasins, and wood for the making of sledges with which to cross the ice fields were put on board. The amount of provisions was increased, and spirits and charcoal were added, for it might be that they would have to winter at some point on the Greenland coast. They also procured, with much difficulty and at a high price, a quantity of lemons for preventing or curing the scurvy, that terrible disease which decimates crews in the icy regions. The ship's hold was filled with salt meat, biscuits, brandy, etc., as the steward's room no longer sufficed. They provided themselves, moreover, with a large quantity of pemmican, an Indian preparation which concentrates a great deal of nutrition within a small volume. By order of the captain, some saws were put on board for cutting the ice fields, as well as picks and wedges for separating them. The captain determined to procure some dogs for drawing the sledges on the Greenland coast. The whole crew was engaged in these preparations and displayed great activity. The sailors Opic, Jervik, and Gradlin zealously obeyed Penellan's orders, and he admonished them not to accustom themselves to woolen garments, though the temperature in this latitude, situated just beyond the polar circle, was very low. Penellan, though he said nothing, narrowly watched every action of André Vasling. This man was Dutch by birth, came from no one knew whither, but was at least a good sailor, having made 2 voyages on board the June Hardy. Penellan would not as yet accuse him of anything, unless it was that he kept near Marie too constantly, but he did not let him out of his sight. Thanks to the energy of the crew, the brig was equipped by the 16th of July, a fortnight after its arrival at Bodo. It was then the favorable season for attempting explorations in the Arctic seas. The thaw had been going on for 2 months, and the search might be carried farther north. The June Hardy set sail and directed her way towards Cape Brewster on the eastern coast of Greenland, near the 70th degree of latitude. Chapter 4. In the passes. About the 23rd of July, a reflection, raised above the sea, announced the presence of the first icebergs, which, emerging from Davis Straits, advanced into the ocean. From this moment, a vigilant watch was ordered to the lookout men, for it was important not to come into collision with these enormous masses. The crew was divided into two watches. The first was composed of Fidel Masson, Gradlin, and Jervik, and the second of André Vasling, Opic, and Penelon. These watches were to last only 2 hours, for in those cold regions a man's strength is diminished 1/2. Though the June Hardy was not yet beyond the 63rd degree of latitude, the thermometer already stood at 9 degrees centigrade below zero. Rain and snow often fell abundantly. On fair days, when the wind was not too violent, Marie remained on deck, and her eyes became accustomed to the uncouth scenes of the polar seas. On the 1st of August, she was promenading aft and talking with her uncle, Penelon, and André Vasling. The ship was then entering a channel 3 miles wide, across which broken masses of ice were rapidly descending southwards. "When shall we see land?" asked the young girl. "In 3 or 4 days at the latest," replied Jean Cornbutt. "But shall we find there fresh traces of my poor Louis?"